Got a beautifully cold day today. Well below freezing. Good strong wind. Feels like a nice day to be outside working, or at least doing something physical. A lot of folks enjoy cross-country skiing in this kind of weather. That's wonderful. Maybe someday I'll get into it. For now, my thing that I like to do is hedgerow work. So I've got my hand saw, I've got a nice pair of loppers here, and I'm out at our 6-acre property. I'm going to work on the boundary line. I've gotten permission from our neighbor to the west to clean up our common hedgerow, and so I was going to take folks along on that process. Could be that the camera runs out of juice because it's so cold before then, but I'll document what I can. You can see what a lot of this work is about. This is all deer track from the last 2 days. It's a pretty immense amount of movement of deer through this landscape still. And I'm fine with that to some extent, although I wouldn't mind being able to block them out from this western end where we're doing more and more production. So this is where we do a fair bit of nursery work. I'm trying to establish trees. I don't mind putting fences around the trees, but I wouldn't mind also just being able to plant without having to worry about it. So we've got this brush wall. I've documented this over the years. This is the northern line here. This is pretty scrawny in this part. That's part of the issue, is that it falls apart over time. Been adding trees. There's a whole bunch of Osage orange in here. There's all sorts of thorny brambles. There's cane fruit, on and on. But that takes a while to establish. So what I'm doing today is working on the west end, so that's further out there, where it's much thicker. Some friends helped me prune the other day. I'll take a look at that and then continue on. I'm creating a dual hedgerow, which I'll explain in a moment. Here's where we planted some chestnut trees recently. I talked about that. So far, the bamboo, even with all the deer browse, the bamboo has been keeping the deer away from nibbling at these young trees, which is awesome. We'll see how long that works, but we got, boy, probably like 50 to 100 trees were planted this fall when we had that unseasonably warm weather. Anyway, I digress. Here's a little break in our fence line. I've got this 14 gauge wire through here and then old scraps of fencing that we're going to let vines weave through, and I've left a little aperture that we can push through and get onto the other side and take a look at the brush wall over there. So here I am on the outside of the fence. I'm outside the northwest corner of our 6-acre property there, and you can see where the property line is. So I established our fence line in from there by a good 10 feet or so, just not to push any boundaries or buttons with folks that care about those details. And so from this property line heading due south is our common line, and our neighbor's been generous enough to let me prune it here. This is the double hedgerow thing I've talked about, or I'm talking about, where this one monolithic pile of shrub layer is being thinned out in the interior so that it maintains the possibility of deer having a corridor. They have a chance to come through this space and bed down. They can get out of the wind and enjoy themselves, but what they can't easily do is move through. This is a thick pile of brush and living material. So we cut back the Japanese honeysuckle, we cut back the European buckthorn. We don't eradicate, we don't spray. We just prune them back hard so they re-sprout lower and weave the debris into here. That's hard enough to get through, and then on the other side of that is 14 gauge metal wire drawn every 2 feet or so. And that has schisandra and air potato and groundnut and all sorts of vines that will fill out in the summer months. So the work for today is thinning out more of this interior, keeping the side that faces our neighbor so it stays lush and green and beautiful and gives him privacy and doesn't look like we've modified a whole lot. And then come through, you can see all the cuts through here. Our friends came by and helped last week. My fingers are freezing, so it's time to put gloves on and do some work. I'm going to do that and then talk about it. This area that we worked on last session feels pretty nice to me. There's some standards in there now. There's a nice big old ash that's growing. Whatever apple wants to grow in here, which is this plant here. There's some serviceberry, there's some sweet cherry that are wild in the hedgerow. That tends to be the case. We leave those, we promote those, and we don't eradicate, but we head back. So for example, Hawthorn, you're welcome to be here. Be a full-size tree, drop fruit for the birds later on. Maybe we'll graft you over to pear someday. European buckthorn, thanks for being here. You break up the soil nice, but let's head you back and keep you a little lower and thicker where we need that visual boundary. And so it's making these selections of appreciating the fact that these plants live here. Japanese honeysuckle, it's a solid wall of green. That's an amazing windbreak, great pollen for the bees, good visual barrier. But let's head off everything that faces in so that we have this walkway. You can see it actually shapes up into something somewhat meaningful and I think personally aesthetically valuable. That's a subjective statement for sure. But we've got our explicit metal fence. It's lightweight in material. It would absolutely not do it if it was on its own in a big open field. But fence post every 20 feet, wire every couple of feet. But then this brush is what really thickens it up. Creates amazing habitat for voles and mice and rabbits and birds, but does not allow deer that want to come out of the field. They can come through here, but they can't come into our land easily. They can't leave from our land easily. And so it's not an absolute wall, it's just a deflector. It just offers an invitation to relax in this double hedgerow. You can see this deer affirming alley through the middle that also allows us to get through and continue to maintain. So more cuts, you can see more heading back on the European buckthorn. More work through here, you can see where it gets thicker. I'll take a look at that before I start pruning. Coming in here to an area that's just a little bit pruned, but not a full amount. So there's still some more heading back of honeysuckle and European buckthorn to do. Here's an interesting little thing to observe, I think. Here's hawthorn doing its thing. We would love for this to grow here as long as it would like. Here's a grape, a wild grape that certainly makes edible medicinal fruit. Do I necessarily want it strangling all up in that hawthorn? No. And also it is not providing much visual barrier for us way up there or potential to access fruit. So I'm going to try to sneak this out and actually weave it into the brush. So that's part of where this dead material is useful, is it becomes this like really coarse simplified basket that vines can lope over. And so when I find vines that are already in this space, going up and not useful can be brought down, and more useful and visual and applicable, let's go for it. It's a simple move, but now this vine is pulled out and laid through. On the other side, sometime in the spring, I'll weave it onto the metal fence so it's really maintainable and we can actually harvest from it. But onward. The wind, it is a-blowing. It's a lot easier to push through a few more feet, and the wall itself is woven way tighter, and the European buckthorn will be triggered to now regrow in a more useful place. I've also learned over the years, making relatively flat cuts on these, the first year regrowth is such that robins tend to like that as a platform. You make them waist height to chest height, and next March or April there'll be a fair number of birds that will seek these out for nesting habitats. That's kind of sweet. Making some nice headway. Certainly walkable through here, a little tight in some spots, but that seems fine and good. The brush wall thickening up, and the wall facing the plant line facing the neighbor's orchard, nice and strong. I don't want to cut this too hard because I need the leaves to be up high to catch any spray drift in the spring, if that's on the horizon for their management again this next year. That's up to them. This is their property, but I do want to see if I can filter out a fair bit of that. So if it weren't for that, I'd head this back tighter to really thicken things up, but I need that spray catch. There's some wild raisin tree that I realized just showed up in there, so I'm going to work around them and liberate them and then just keep moving down through the line. I'm about the halfway point on the western end of this landscape. Very, very tightly woven debris in with living material. Here's an aperture that I left a ways back with the idea that this could be a place where deer come through if we want them to. I don't really want to make some sort of fortress that forever, no deer ever, but on our side we've got the fence post in a way where there's a ring of wire, so we can open that up if we want to come into the space or move through. But over here, I think for now I'm going to actually patch this off and keep the deer moving and not invite them into our space and then further on. I saw some deer tracks through here, some rabbit tracks. It's an interesting place for them, so it's time to weave that in. Some debris woven in, but then also taking existing material growing and pushing it down and in with weight on top. That'll help keep that alive and encourage more vertical new growth. This European buckthorn, pollarded before, is now cut at an angle, but with a little bit of connecting material, this can regrow and lean down. Eventually that'll shear off and die. That's fine. There'll be new growth behind it, but that thickens this up. It needs a little bit more, but not much. And another example of a beautiful grapevine, problematic in the hedgerow design, but a nice asset to weave through here. So that's what I'll do. It's a neat surprise here amongst this older apple. This is a seedling apple, pretty much right smack dab on the property line, and finding some old barbed wire, some old metal wire. So this was what somebody generations past agreed upon was the property line. And some old school stuff here. Basically breaks apart in the hand just about. And here's this post. So stapled in with really old metal staples. This is a good spot here to see. This is from a few generations ago. I would suspect that this upright post is an upside down hand split black locust, or maybe even Osage orange. It has the look of Osage a little bit to me. Folks in the comments, if you've got an idea, let me know. And this could be anywhere from 80 to, I don't know, 150 years old. It was at some point when people were grazing, probably cattle through here, I would guess, with the look of that barbed wire. But those folks that know, let us know in the comments. But interesting to be maintaining the boundary line from a space that's been maintained for a bunch of generations. And then that doesn't even touch on how many generations of folks were here way, way back doing other beautiful things, certainly without metal fencing, that's for sure. In the home stretch now of the western wall here, started at the northwest, headed southbound, been pruning, and there's some lean spots in the wall, but lots of vegetation on our side, so that should be fine. Weaving a bunch of the red osier out into the sun rather than cutting them really hard, and that's the home stretch, the southern western corner of the landscapes out there. I'm going to get to there and then stop for the day and have lunch. I'll talk to our neighbors that are to the south and see if we can do the same management on that southern line all the way back to the road, and talk to our neighbors to the north. They've been amenable in the past, and just get this wild hedgerow vegetation, dead and alive, woven, pollarded, laid, all mixed, functional and pretty fun on a nice cold, bright, sunny winter day. This part of the wall is particularly sparse right in here. Our fence line on the inside, I added a little bit more metal, maybe you can see, but I'd like to thicken this up quite a bit. Fair bit of last work here to do is to go through and renew all of these European buckthorn pollards. It's a lot of material in here. I'm going to head them back, head some of this vegetation back, and get this a lot thicker. Fair bit thicker. Could use some more, but that certainly will be enough to keep the deer out for a bit, especially with the Osage orange on the inside of our line, along with the metal fence. And interesting hybrid cuts here, some lower pollards where it'll just be easier to manage down here, and then some of these higher trees that make a good windbreak. I'm cutting everything on our side up so that they can regrow into here, but leaning out towards that spray drift, there'll be vegetation in the spring. Prune my way to the southern corner, southern western corner. Lots more woven in here, a lot of bigger European buckthorn to run a cap to this brush wall. Tons of grapes woven through, some really intense heading cuts on some of these to promote a lot more shoot growth, a release for hawthorns and little seedling apples and the like, and a corridor that deer can move through but really can't easily hop over. That is the brush line that they need to move through, and then a metal fence with material pushed through it. I think we get at least a few years of grace that they won't move through the western side of this, but they can live out here. And that's the corner, and that's the end of this one. Lots more work to be done, but that's what winter's for. Bundle up, put on some good quality gloves, and get to it. That's what I like to do. Thanks for watching.